So welcome to this Lunch and Learn. My name is Sally Leach. I'm from Henpick Menopause in the Workplace and delighted to be here again this week and delighted to be joined by Antonia de Gier. Antonia is a nutritional therapist and she joined us a few weeks ago to talk about menopause and nutrition in general. But today we're really focusing on food, mood, anxiety and depression. And really that understanding around those psychological symptoms that maybe we don't always associate with menopause. And we know they can have a really big impact. But the question we kind of really want to cover today is, well, can what you eat, your diet, your nutrition, can that really have an impact and make a difference to these symptoms? So Antonia, welcome to today's session.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sally. Thank you for having me on again.
So nice to have you back. So the first question we wanted to start with is it possible that what we eat can indeed really affect our menopause symptoms, and specifically this kind of psychological symptoms like the mood, the anxiety and the depression?
Yes, the very simple answer to that, Sally, is yes, it can. And what I'd like to do is just spend a few minutes explaining slightly more the science behind it all before I try and help with some practical tips. So obviously we're in an area where reproductive hormones are fluctuating and declining. Just a quick recap, estrogen is our reproductive hormone, which helps normally to release the egg, help us to become pregnant. Progesterone is the hormone that's released in our second half of the cycle, which either helps to embed the fetus or, as we know, shed our womb lining. Obviously, as we get older, that starts to change and those hormones start to decline, but can have bursts and then are very, very low again. So those are our reproductive hormones. And I think if I just explain in a nutshell just a few things where estrogen is involved, it's very clear why we might start to struggle in our brain health and our mental health. So, for example, estrogen has quite a complex influence, excuse me, on our nervous system, for example, which is how we deal with our stress hormones and what they do for us. It has an impact on what we call our neurotransmitters. So hormones and neurotransmitters do a very similar job, but they are slightly different and they are derived from different substances. So our neurotransmitters are really our messengers in the body, whilst our hormones actually will give information to the cells and start to activate them. And they have a very, very complex interconnecting system. Estrogen is also involved in the production and the release and the uptake of serotonin. Now, serotonin is what we call our happy hormone, which I'm sure we've all heard of at times. And then finally, just another one is estrogen is involved in what we call our circadian rhythm. So that's our body clock. So it's involved in the production of cortisol, which we need in the morning to wake us up, get us going, and also then in melatonin. Later on in the day, we want that to be produced. That helps us to slow down, calm down, and get ready for bed, essentially. So that's estrogen. Progesterone has a much more protective mechanism on the brain and helps us to calm down a little bit, and is also involved in the production of a chemical called GABA, which I'm going to talk about a little later when we come on to anxiety. So hormones are made essentially from cholesterol, which needs to come from dietary fat and good fats. Neurotransmitters are essentially made from products called amino acids, which come from protein food sources. So that's why already we can see that fats and proteins are important. And then on top of that, glucose, which are carbohydrates, are our main energy fuel for the brain. So that's where the first link comes from.
Absolutely, and understanding the importance of those three big food groups.
Absolutely.
In our diet.
Absolutely.
So in terms of kind of your kind of top tips in terms of the best ways, in particular thinking around anxiety, low mood, depression, what are some of the things that we should be thinking about in what we eat that can really support any symptoms people might be experiencing?
Yeah, it's important to mention that anxiety is very much linked more to our stress hormones. So that's our cortisol and our adrenaline, and we really need those hormones. We mustn't dismiss them. They are the most important hormones to help us to survive. That's why we need them. The difficulty is that as our estrogen levels start to decline, our adrenals take over producing the estrogen for us, albeit in a different form. Now, the stress hormones will always win. In any hormonal situation, our stress hormones will win. So easier said than done, I know, for very, very busy working women, teenagers, elderly parents, relationships, etc. But I think the really important thing is to try and be kind to ourselves as much as we can, and try and manage that stress where we can. The most important thing to do for our stress levels is to try and balance our blood sugar levels. And that means just keeping a very even rate. We can do that by eating protein with each of our meals and eating regularly. So that's the first thing. I would like to just look at one particular amino acid that I mentioned. So that is called GABA. Now, this is a neurotransmitter which really helps our whole system to calm down. So any excess adrenaline that we have in the day, that just helps to calm everything down, relax us. It's what we call the brain's peacemaker. Now, when it's working, everything's fantastic. If we don't have enough, we get irritable, we get tense, we get depressed. Now, the good news is that can be derived from an amino acid called taurine. We also need a range of B vitamins to help us to make that amino acid. So taurine can be found in animal foods, fish, eggs, good quality meats. That's one area that's quite difficult for vegetarians and vegans, because they can at times be deficient in that. But we'll talk a little bit about supplementation later. B vitamins, so B3, folic acid, B12, these can be found in a real range of foods. So again, to do the meat sources first, so chicken, turkey, oily fish. But then we can also look at mushrooms, asparagus, potatoes, leafy green veg, root vegetables, cottage cheese, soya beans, tofu. So those are our B vitamins, and taurine comes from the animal foods. The bad news with GABA is that it really thrives on alcohol and tranquilizers and any kind of relaxing substances that we perceive are relaxing. So I'm sure many of us are familiar with that lovely feeling. We've had a stressful day and we think, oh, I'm just going to have a nice glass of wine. And one glass of wine is absolutely fine, but that releases the GABA. We all think, oh, we feel absolutely wonderful, and we relax, and we think, well, I'll just have another glass to make me feel even better. Now, sadly, when we've got a certain level of GABA, that's absolutely great and that feels good, but the GABA starts to then decline. And sadly, that makes us a little bit more irritable, a bit tense. We can't quite get that feeling from the first glass of wine. And we go to bed and fall asleep and think everything's fine. And unfortunately, in the long run, we actually become more anxious because our levels are off balance. But I can talk about that a bit later. I'm not saying don't ever drink again. You know, we've got to be realistic in our lives. Magnesium is a very good mineral, tends to help us with all our hormone balance. It's a muscle relaxant, actually quite helpful for relaxing before going to bed. Also helps us with building our new brain cells, which if we've got a huge amount of stress can actually become damaged. And that we'll find in our nuts and seeds, big range of nuts and seeds: Brazils, almonds, cashews, pumpkin seeds, sunflower seeds, dark green leafy veg again, and a wide variety of fruit.
Brilliant. Okay, so in terms of like big top tips, then making sure we have protein in every meal, and
Absolutely.
regularly around managing that blood sugar level are two of the key things that are really going to help.
That's it. Absolutely. And also, I think this is a good moment to mention, Sally, Nigel and I, we have talked about this before, but this is not a time for attempting to skip meals. It's not a time to diet. It's not a time to try fads. And this is not a quick fix. You know, we're looking at quite a number of years in our life, and we're looking at a very transitional period. And I think if we can get into the routine of having a really good breakfast as well, women in general are much better at balancing their blood sugar levels early on in the day. So get the goodness in. If you make a good start, then the rest of the day will follow. Getting outside, but I'll talk a little bit about that later. But I do think it's very important. Our digestive health is good in the morning. Our circadian rhythm thanks us if we can get outside and get stimulated in the morning. All of these things for women are very important and helpful.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked a little bit around alcohol not being necessarily something that might be supportive in excess.
Yeah.
But is there anything
Similarly,
else?
coffee. Similarly, coffee.
I was going to say, yeah, anything else that you would say we should be trying to avoid or can have a big impact on our mood?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, it's quite simple to understand. If we have a cup of coffee, and particularly on an empty stomach or between meals, what coffee does is it immediately releases adrenaline. Now, adrenaline will raise, again, our blood sugar levels, which means that we get that feeling, we think, oh yes, we're great, we're awake, we can keep going, but of course we then have a crash yet again, and we come down to lower blood sugar levels than we had before, and we're just making our insulin work a bit harder, you know, to yet again transport that sugar into the cells to either be used as energy or to be stored as fat. So again, sadly, in the long term, the caffeine will only make us more anxious as opposed to less. Again, not saying don't drink it. I think the odd cup of coffee is absolutely fine. Drink it with your food, drink it with your breakfast, or have a small snack, have a few nuts and a piece of fruit, for example.
Okay, I can see people are just mentioning around cravings and just thinking around the kind of sugary foods and how that, because there is that often that feeling of if you're feeling stressed or anxious or that low mood, and thinking where, you know, reach for a piece of cake or a bit of chocolate to kind of make you feel better.
Absolutely.
What are your kind of guidance around that, and what's going on to make us feel like that?
So what's going on is, as I mentioned, our stress hormones are going to be all over the place, especially if we are living in a long-term stressful environment, which I'm well aware a lot of us are. And cortisol, the stress hormone, which, as I said, we need in the morning, you know, we need that to wake us up and get us going. But what we like is that it then tails off throughout the day. And cortisol, unfortunately, is what is driving those cravings. Yeah. So if we're feeling a bit stressed, a bit anxious, so we think, oh, I'll have a cup of coffee, and then we might think, oh, I'll have a bit of chocolate, or I'll have a pastry. I think it's really talking about starting small. So don't cut out everything immediately. We very often feel worse before we start to feel better when we really try and cut everything out. Again, I would say long-term approach. Start by adding in first. So if you really want to have a Danish pastry or a muffin, something like that, start with having a few nuts with it. Start with perhaps having a piece of cheese and an oat cake, and then just seeing if maybe just a little square of dark chocolate will do the trick. And hopefully, as your blood sugar levels become more balanced, hopefully then everything else starts to fall into place.
Yeah, and that kind of leads on to the next question around how long it takes to kind of feel any different.
Yeah. Well, obviously, as a nutritional therapist, then it's generally an educational role, but I have another hat, if you like, which is a health coaching role, which is actually very important as well, because we all know in general what we should be doing and what we shouldn't be doing. And we're quite intuitive. And I think, obviously, listen to the body. But in general, what we say in health coaching, we have something that we call the 3-6-36 rule. Now, that means really it takes about 3 weeks to break a habit. And it takes about 6 weeks for a new habit to be set in place. And then it takes about 36 weeks for that really to become the absolute default. So, you know, I don't know, giving up sugar in your tea, for example. And so again, it's not a quick fix. You know, it really has to be, I'm taking the trouble to change the way I feel. Now, I think personally, if you take it slowly, you know, good in a month, 2 months, you know, maybe even 2 weeks, you really start to feel the difference. And again, I would just say, do it slowly. You know, if you want to have a glass of wine, have a glass of wine with some food. Don't try and have that wine on an empty stomach, or see what works for you. Don't drink every day. Or if you know you're going to have a big celebration, just lay off for a few days. And always with food. Same with coffee. If you're drinking, I don't know, 3 or 4 cups of coffee plus, just start with reducing 1. And then a week or 10 days later, think, right, okay, I can take it down to the next level.
Yeah,
that's what I would advise.
Yeah, so in terms of then getting started, that small changes. And I really like that idea of adding in before taking away, because I think we can all feel, oh, I've got to cut that out, I've got to stop that, I've got to stop that. And it can feel quite hard.
Yeah. And you know, let's be realistic. We do like the alcohol and the caffeine and the sugar. You know, it's what keeps us all going. So we think. And sometimes it's just the easiest thing to grab that and grab a pastry on the go. So again, be kind to yourself and plan a bit if you can. Try and work out. And if you end up having a breakfast like that, don't beat yourself up about it. You know, just try and then have a better lunch, or sit down at the weekend and think, okay, how can I make my working week a little bit easier, and plan a little bit and prepare.
Yeah, and I think that planning and preparation can be really helpful, because everyone does have, as you say, really busy lives, and trying to, it's the on the go, or I just need to do something.
Absolutely. And Sally, I just wanted to say, so we've talked quite a lot about anxiety, and I have to say, I think that is a real big one in the perimenopause and the menopause. So many people that I speak to really find that they worry about things a lot more than they ever would have done before. Another thing, I want to just go on to low mood, but I just want to say, where possible, I think women in their 30s and 40s, if they can really start to prepare and think about these things, it doesn't quite hit them like a freight train, as it does with so many people with their psychological symptoms as well as their physical symptoms. So I think if you can get these small things in place early on, it really does help. But just so, low mood is another one. Depression, feeling a bit rubbish. I think it's important to just say now that, you know, 20% at least of women going through this menopausal transition suffer from depression. There is absolutely a place for getting help. So where women are able, I would advocate HRT. I know some women can't take HRT. They don't want to as well, and that's absolutely fine. There is research and a slight growing trend that GPs will offer antidepressants. And again, that has its place, and that's really fantastic when people need it and it can help. But quite often it's the hormones that are missing. It's the estrogen and the progesterone and the fluctuations and the decline. So first of all, really important to talk to your GP if you're struggling. Low mood, we talked a little bit earlier about estrogen and its effect, and estrogen is involved in the production of serotonin, our happy hormone, and also melatonin, which helps us to slow down at the end of the day and fall asleep. Now, if we don't have very much estrogen, then we won't necessarily have very much serotonin. So we are automatically feeling a bit rubbish. We feel low, we're not happy. Then if we don't have any serotonin, we don't have any melatonin. And then if we're struggling at night to fall asleep and we have sleep disturbances, that makes us feel rubbish as well. Yeah. So the good thing that we can do for that is looking at two substances. So again, B6, another vitamin, and tryptophan, which is an amino acid. We need these in order to produce the serotonin and the melatonin. These are found again in tofu, nuts, seeds, fruit, chicken, cheese. So again, all the good proteins, peas, tuna, eggs, all of those sorts of foods can actually really help us and just lifts the mood. Again, we tend to think that sometimes if we're low in serotonin, we do crave carbohydrates and the sugary carbohydrates again. And if you can get these good foods in place, then hopefully the cravings start to minimize.
And how much do you kind of, to be able to generate enough serotonin if you're kind of slightly deficient in estrogen as you're going through the transition, what kind of, how much do you need to be eating of those kind of foods to give you that good feeling?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you put in your, if you tried in your daily diet, for example, that you had an egg or two in the morning, for example, or you had some cottage cheese with some oat cakes. Nut butter is a real favorite of mine. If you had a good teaspoon of nut butter in the morning, for example, and then you're looking at having perhaps a piece of salmon or tofu at lunchtime, and not forgetting also for the vegans and vegetarians as well, all the legumes, the pulses, the kidney beans, the lentils, the brown rice, etc. I think if you are having a good portion of those with each meal, then you should be on the right track.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Before, I know we've got lots of questions and sharing. It's always wonderful to see lots of questions and sharing. I'll bring Sarah on, who's been working in the background a moment. Just a quick question before we go into the ones that have been submitted, just around supplements.
Yes.
And kind of, are there any things that we should be thinking about as well as our nutrition from a supplement point of view?
Yeah, I think as always, start with the food. And I do appreciate that's not always so easy for vegetarians or vegans as well. Some of these amino acids, these proteins, we can't get from our non-animal food sources. So supplementation is important there, but I would really advocate talking to a health specialist, either seeing a nutritional therapist or going into your local health food shop. You know, they should be educated, they should be able to help you. There are some contraindications as well, especially if a lady has had breast cancer, for example. There are some herbal remedies that can help, but you just need to be careful. So St. John's wort, for example, is a good one. But again, you need to check and you need to get professional advice that this will be okay. I would say a really good B vitamin, a multi B vitamin, is very helpful because those are your absolute first vitamins for mood swings, mental health. So we can get that from food, but that I would say is a really good pointer for supplementation. Magnesium, again, very good one. You can actually take that just before you're going to bed, and that can actually help to relax and just help you sleep.
Brilliant, thank you. Sarah, I'll pass over to you. We've got lots of sharing. As
we
always,
have.
Really appreciated.
We always have loads of sharing, and thank you. There was lots of questions, Antonia, about supplements and magnesium and vitamin D. So yeah, thank you for picking up on that one. So there's
just one more. Sorry, Sarah,
yes,
I'm just going to interrupt you now as well, saying that vitamin D, just to say, get outside if you can. Early in the morning, if you can. Our estrogen levels respond very well to light. And that's why we say, again, our circadian rhythm, it's really good for women to try and get out either first thing in the morning or mid-morning if they can. It just gets everything going. So your estrogen gets going a bit, your serotonin, the physical exercise is a great stress reducer. So that, just wanted to say that with the vitamin D.
No, that's brilliant. I know you touched on that earlier, and Nigel, who we had on one of our earlier sessions, spoke about that, I think, at the end of last year.
Yeah.
Is there, just related to that, is there a best time in the day when people should be taking these vitamins and supplements?
I think it's very much individual. So you want to take them with food. Sometimes, I don't know if anyone's experienced that, but sometimes you can feel a bit sick if you take a lot of vitamins and not enough. It's not a problem. It's just quite a lot for your digestive system to cope with. So if you're taking them with food, then that can just help to slow the digestion down a little. So sometimes I can't face them in the morning with my breakfast, for example, and I find that lunch is much better. But it's individual. It's where you are. If you're at work, if it's easier at home, it's finding what suits you.
Absolutely. And earlier on, Antonia, you spoke a lot about the hormone levels, and someone's saying, is there a way of testing, what our levels might be, or is it really a case of trial and error because we're all so individual?
For hormones?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the only way really we can do that is there are different tests. There are obvious blood tests with your GP, with your gynecologist. There are various saliva tests, for example, even urine tests that you can do. But again, it's quite important to see a health professional, either a doctor or a nutritional therapist can help you with that.
Yeah, brilliant. And then a number of people were asking earlier when you were mentioning the caffeine, so what about caffeine-free coffees and these caffeine-free drinks? Can we drink as many of those as possible?
Well, I would just say decaf coffee it still has a tiny amount of caffeine. So I think it has something like 3% of the amount of caffeinated coffee. I think in an ideal world, we would be having herbal teas, for example, hot water, lemon and ginger. That's very good. That's quite calming as well. But I'm realistic. We all like a cup of coffee from time to time. I think what we do need to be careful of is all of these drinks now in the coffee places with extra milk, extra caramel. These are quite sugary. So in actual fact, the caffeine per se is not such a problem. It's all the stuff that they are now adding into these drinks before we've even started. So just in terms of the blood sugar and the sweet cravings, we really want to try and avoid that if we can.
And there's been a lot of comments about natural sugar, people saying, is it better to have dates and raisins? And someone else is saying, fruit is good for you.
Fruit is good for you, and fruit is good for us, particularly at this age and stage. I would always say try and go fresh and try and go whole fruits because we get all the goodness then, and they're a bit harder, take a bit longer to digest. But I would also say if you're looking for a sweet craving, a few raisins, absolutely fine. A date, a dried fig. But again, just have it with a little bit of protein. Little slice of cheese, cottage cheese, something like that, just so you're not having the pure sugar hit.
Fantastic. And another question that came in is, all this advice that you're giving, Antonia, would that be the same for individuals that have undergone and gone through surgical menopause?
Yes, absolutely.
Brilliant.
Yeah. With surgical menopause, obviously the onslaught is quite a hit because it's very sudden. So obviously depends if you've had your ovaries taken out, for example, full hysterectomy. But yes, I mean, women then really struggle because they've got the psychological aspect of having had the hysterectomy, and they've got the physical effects of a very sharp drop in estrogen. So yes, I think they need to be kindest of all to themselves.
Definitely.
Yeah. We have a time to prepare. We sort of think, oh, what's happening? And they have a very, very tough onslaught.
Yeah, and I have to share with you, Antonia, but lots of people are giggling about it and putting comments in, like somebody has said they're eating like an unsupervised toddler, especially in the evenings. Is this normal?
I can relate to that.
It is normal, but can I just say, unfortunately, so many women, they worry about their weight, they think, my God, you know, it's just not, I'm not losing weight anymore. They tend to skip breakfast, and then they get home after a busy day at work and they start eating a lot. Really try and get your breakfast in place. It doesn't have to be a huge breakfast. It can be a quick breakfast. But if there's one rule, the 2 golden rules: breakfast and protein with each meal.
Yeah.
And I really think if you can get those in place, other bits will follow.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much. There's loads and loads of comments and sharing. It's been really wonderful. There's a few questions that have come up that I think will help inform some future sessions around brain fog and things that we've talked about before that I think will be really beneficial. But just want to say a huge thank you to Antonia for joining us, and for Sarah, and for everyone for joining in the chat and sharing all your thoughts, ideas and suggestions and experiences. And yeah, I will try not to be an unsupervised toddler later on tonight.
Well, we all have to embrace our inner child from time to time.
Absolutely. But thank you all very much, and we look forward to seeing you on the next session.
Thank you. Thanks, Sally.